the clicker before I start. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. And I'm going to start by showing you a picture. Or not. Does this work now? Great. This is me joining my 9-year-old son last week on Friday in Oxford, the Global Climate March. Why do I show you this picture? I think, certainly in my lifetime, I've never been so hopeful that there's real possibility for change, for system transformation of the energy system. 4 million people, that's what Euractiv reported, were taking to the streets on Friday, demanding action. And I think that's what this conference is all about, or has to be about. How can we create an energy system that's clean, that's efficient, much more flexible, much more smart, and is zero carbon in the end? I think that's a critical question for this conference. I'm going to focus on energy efficiency as part of that. I think efficiency is a critical pillar of that process. It's not going to solve all our problems, but without energy efficiency, we're not going to solve the problem that we have at hand. In Europe, efficiency first is now an important principle that's embedded in the clean energy package. Some of you may have heard that term before. I guess those of you who come from further afield, from the US, it may not be a familiar term, but essentially efficiency first means to put efficiency front and center of the energy transition rather than putting it as an end-of-pipe technology that you use later on. So that's really what efficiency first is all about. And in my presentation today, I'm going to cover 3 aspects. One is to look briefly at how far have we come in Europe in terms of our energy consumption. How far could we go? The second point I want to make is what are the key opportunities that I see that efficiency can provide? Where does it deliver the key benefits? And then look at some of the implementation options. What can we actually do to make it happen? So those are the 3 things I want to cover. Before I do that, I want to tell you 2 stories. One depressing, it's a personal story, and one that's inspiring and much more optimistic. I'm going to start with the depressing story first. This is my house in Oxford, and in May this year we installed a heat pump. When the installer came around to estimate what size of heat pump we would need, he did a heat loss survey, very detailed building physics, software. Then he asked me, are you planning any other energy efficiency measures? And I said, oh yes, we want to insulate that wall, we want to install triple glazing. And he just said, no, don't do any of that. Don't do that. And I asked him, why not? He said, well, you will get less money from the state if you do it, because the payments you get in the UK, the subsidies for renewable heat, are linked to the estimated heat demand. So the less efficient you're building, the more money you get, because the higher the heat loss is. There's just an example of how silly policy can be designed, providing perverse incentives that are really not well aligned at all. That's a depressing example. The inspiring one comes all the way from across the pond, from New York. So those of you who traveled from America might think, why do we come all the way to Europe to hear about a story from the US? I think this is one of the best examples of how efficiency can really play a central role in the energy transition. So in 2014 in New York, the local utility, Con Edison, had a big problem. Electricity demand in the Brooklyn, Queens area was rising very rapidly. The local substation that was serving that area, the Brownsville substation, could not cope with that increase in demand. So what they would usually do is to simply rebuild the substation, upgrade the grid, and they estimated that would cost them about $1 billion US. But they didn't do that. Instead, they ran an open tender, a call for proposals, if you will, and they asked anybody to come forward with solutions to the problem, which was congestion, an increase in demand. And what they got was not a new substation, but a whole suite of demand-side management measures, including lots of energy efficiency and demand-side response, at a cost of $200 million US. So a saving for consumers of $800 million by simply allowing other resources to participate in that process and not just replacing like for like. So I think that's a really inspiring example that we can learn a lot from in Europe. And in fact, lots of the recent legislation has been informed by that kind of spirit. I now want to come to the main part of my presentation. So first, I said I would talk about the progress we've made in Europe and the potential that there still is for energy efficiency. On this slide, you can see energy consumption trends in Europe from the 1990s to today. you can see that especially to 2005, consumption was going up quite rapidly, and after that it's going down. Why is that? Well, one reason is the financial crisis. You can see the recession in this curve very clearly. The other one is that about after 2006, we had the first serious energy efficiency directives in Europe, and you can see consumption going down. In more recent years, the last 3 years, consumption is actually going up. And there's a big question why that is. The Commission has actually assembled a task force on energy consumption, and they're looking at the different factors driving that. One of the papers on our stall there is actually looking at the factors that are responsible for that increase, a paper that we've written looking at what is driving that increase in consumption. And part of that is the poor implementation of policy, but that's not the only factor. Economic growth also plays clearly an important role here. Why do I show you this slide? I think it demonstrates that policy can drive change. Looking at the drivers behind it, this is data from the Odyssey project. I actually talked about this project with Carolyn from Grenoble Business School before we started the conference. So the Odyssey project looks at the different factors that drive consumption in Europe and decomposes energy trends that we see. And what they have done is to look back at the last, I think it's 16 years of data, and they found that energy savings are the key driver in reducing consumption. You see the other factors, changes in the climate, demography, the lifestyles, also have a role to play, but efficiency was the main driver in reducing final consumption here, which is good news, right? I mean, efficiency worked. How far could we go? You may say, actually, your data there showed the last 3 years consumption was going up, and maybe we just reached the limits of what is possible with energy efficiency. Luckily, we have some data from Fraunhofer Institute. For those who are not from Europe, this is a very authoritative institute based in Germany, and they have really intense modeling underway where they look at the different opportunities for energy efficiency all across the economy. And their data indicates that we can easily halve consumption in Europe, depending on which scenario you go for. I'm not going to walk you through the different scenarios, but the key message is that they say there's a lot more space for energy efficiency in the energy system. This is data from 2019, so it's very recent. If you want the study, I can tell you later where to find it. But there's lots more potential. So we are certainly not at the end of energy efficiency as a driver of decarbonization. So now I want to turn to the key benefits that doing all this would actually bring. And I'm not going to focus on all of the benefits. There are multiple of them. Some of you may have seen the flower that the IEA produced with all the multiple benefits. And I know that Carolyn will talk about the social benefits in particular after my presentation and look at fuel poverty. I'm not going to talk about that because that would be duplication of her presentation. Instead, I'm going to look at the energy system benefits, and I just pick 3 of them. The first is about networks. I'm just going to skip this. This is the control room of National Grid in the UK. And I told you the story about Con Edison in New York. And what actually happens in the UK right now is that there are pilot projects underway. For example, from SSE, the SAFE project, they have a great website you can look up with lots of data where they demonstrate the value of energy efficiency and flexibility and the savings they see in the network to manage congestion, to manage peak load. So energy efficiency, rather than just saving people money on their bills, which is how it's often framed, can be used to manage the power system and reduce impacts on the grid, especially with increase in electric loads through electrification, with an increase of variable renewables. So efficiency really has a role to play here, and already does in some places where it's being trialed. The second benefit that I see is renewables. So often renewables and efficiency in Europe are seen as almost competing options. And when you talk to advocates in Brussels, it sometimes feels like there's a battle for funds. We need to get more of that, and the other should get less. And I think that is a false dichotomy. Essentially, we need both, and efficiency enables more renewable penetration faster. The IRENA study published 2 years ago shows that very clearly. They show that you can get much faster to higher levels of penetration of renewables if you have a highly energy efficient system. And there are several reasons for that. One is the size of the problem is smaller. If you have a more efficient energy system, you just need less energy. But it's also much more easy to decarbonize things like heating or transport if you have a lot of energy efficiency. So there's a real synergy there that can be leveraged, not competition. I think that's important to understand. And sometimes in Europe, we have been too isolated in our approach. We had renewables policies, efficiency policies, pushing a certain technology, but not seeing that they actually need to be linked. My example from my own house in the heat pump is a good one. We have a support instrument for renewable heat that pays you for generating renewable heat. But it doesn't link with the energy efficiency policies well. And in fact, we should have something that is much more integrated and provides an incentive to align both efficiency and renewables. The third, and I think really important benefit that efficiency brings is around electrification. We now have projections for significant amount of electric heat in Europe. It's gonna happen in different places at different speeds. And what is the role of efficiency in that? I think there's so many areas where efficiency can contribute. One is flexibility. If you have highly efficient buildings, you can store heat much more cheaply than electric energy, and you can use that resource to manage the grid. This is not just theoretical. There are lots of pilot projects, for example, from Denmark, where you can see that highly efficient buildings with heat pumps can be managed in such a way to coincide with wind energy overnight. So when there's excess renewables on the system, you can absorb that, use it for heat generation, preheat the buildings, avoid the peak, and therefore manage the system much more flexibly. If we just go down the route of electrify everything and avoid the efficiency issue and ignore it, I think the cost of that will be a lot higher. We have a lot more problems with peak load, with grid issues when managing all that. But having highly efficient buildings enables us to do that much more flexibly, and it will reduce total cost. I think the other reason is that lots of the technologies actually don't work very well. If you have a heat pump in a building that's very poorly insulated, you're not going to be able to use that very effectively. The coefficient of performance or the efficiency of that technology will be very poor if it's a very poorly insulated building, and the running cost will be much higher. So we need efficiency together with electrification to make it work well. And I want to talk about implementation options that I see that we have in Europe. And there's just 4 of them. There are many more, but 4 of them I want to point out. The first one is about smart data users. This is the old world. Reading meters, maybe every 3 months and estimated bills. We now have much more ability to use data smartly. We don't do it in Europe yet, everywhere, but we certainly have seen, that's in the US, I think, in particular, in California, we've seen examples of using data much more smartly, using data in such a way that we can identify when and where energy efficiency and demand-side response flexibility adds the most value in the system. So there are companies now in California selling this as a service to the utilities, saying, look, if you have problems managing your power system, your grid, we can tell you where you can reduce loads and what value that will add to your system, and they get paid for that. Again, I think that's a really interesting way of financing energy efficiency. You're not paying for measures, but you're paying for performance, for savings, and that's what it's all about. In Europe, we often pay for energy efficiency measures, install them, and assume a certain amount of savings will be delivered. In reality, we know there's a big performance gap. The technologies don't perform as well in situ as they do in your model when you make the assumptions. If you have much better data, you can actually pay for results rather than pay for the inputs. I think that's a key opportunity that will become much more important in Europe. And again, the SAFE project did some of that in the UK. The second opportunity is around market design. I don't know how many of you have seen the headlines in November last year about the UK capacity market. I guess those who are not from Europe will not have seen those. But essentially what happened is that the European Commission decided that the UK government had to hold the capacity market, which is a market to procure future energy capacity. And the reason for that was mainly because they argued the rules were written in such a way that they discriminated against things like demand-side response and demand-side resources. In the US, in the PJM and isolated capacity market, energy efficiency and demand-side response can bid and provide a significant amount of capacity. What's the impact of that? It reduces the clearing price in that auction, and it saves millions, if not billions, for consumers. It also avoids overspending on the supply side and locking in more fossil fuel-based technology. So market design really matters, and actually in the clean energy package for all legislation, in the electricity directive and regulation, we have language that suggests that member states need to open up their capacity mechanisms and markets so that demand-side resources can participate fully. There's a paper on our stall as well that explains in more detail how that could work and how it could be done, but essentially there's an opportunity to bring in demand-side resources into a supply-side focused market. The next area where we see significant potential is around performance-based regulation. What does this mean? You know, when you have regulated markets with network companies in Europe still being fully regulated, in the US it's different because we have vertically integrated utilities quite often in many of the countries, many of the states. But in Europe it's the network side that is still regulated. The supply side has been largely liberalized in most countries. So what the regulator can do is set an incentive system in such a way that we encourage energy efficiency, flexibility, and give them credit if they deliver on the demand side as well. Can this work? Yes, it can. So there are some approaches called shared savings in the US where when utilities deliver energy efficiency to their customers, they can get a chunk of the benefits as revenue and make more profit. And in Europe we have, again, in the legislation now, some language that actually asks the regulators to test whether what the network companies propose in terms of investment against alternatives, such as energy efficiency measures and flexibility. So essentially network companies will have to prove that their investment portfolio is the most cost-effective for consumers and explicitly consider the demand side in that process. And that could really make a big difference given that we spend billions every year in each member state on the network side. So that's an important area, and performance-based regulation can play a role there. Again, there's a paper that's on our stall that you can see here that you can pick up if you wish. And the last area where I see opportunity for significant advances in energy efficiency is carbon revenue recycling. The carbon price in Europe has gone up significantly over the last 1.5 years. It's now a lot higher than what it used to be. This also means that member states have a lot more carbon revenue, and that revenue can be recycled into energy efficiency or any other clean energy resources, in fact. And per euro paid by customers, we can maximize the impact on carbon reduction. This is already done in some countries. Germany, for example, recycles most of its carbon revenues and uses for energy efficiency. It's also done in some of the US states under the RGGI framework. So there is carbon revenue recycling already taking place, but not enough. There's still a lot of member states who are simply using the carbon revenues and put it into the public coffers, but they're not using it for further investments. But it's essentially an independent revenue stream that can be used to drive further carbon reduction and invest in energy efficiency. So those are just 4 potential areas where we could do more with energy efficiency, and also outside of the traditional dedicated support programs and regulation, and embedding it more in the energy policy as a whole. I want to leave you with a picture of Greta Thunberg. I guess some of you may have seen the article. This was from The Guardian yesterday. This was her speech to the UN. I think the demands have been clearly articulated. Making it happen is a lot of work. I think we're in the right venue here to have those discussions. I'm optimistic. I think it can be done. It just needs smart people like you to think about the right solutions and then get the political will. So I'm optimistic, and I think we will have a great discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jan. You are optimistic, I must confess. And when I looked at the news this morning about the reactions of several of the member states last night, I was not so sure if I will be optimistic, because the technical opportunities and the think tanks results and the willingness of parts of the population apparently does not yet translate into national governments' activities. And coming from Germany, we can confirm that from recent decisions. But let's hope, and at least the opportunities which you have shown are there and should be known to all of us. I would allow one question to him, then we move to the next speaker. It's a high responsibility now to have the one question, but try to formulate it in a way that it complements his words. please. And also tell us your name and where from you are.
Schneider Electric. I'm in charge of energy global public policy for Schneider, and I'm looking at policies everywhere in the world. And my question is, when we look at, if we put our shoes in the as a customer, let's say a private customer, a company is looking at its energy equation globally. So it's procurement, it's about sustainable goals, it's about cost optimization. So they are looking at renewable energy efficiency and I would say distributed energy resources on their side. And today, my comment is about the joint actions we would like to see, meaning on one side we don't have, for example, aggregation of new requests on the building codes or energy codes in the US or construction codes. On the other side, we don't have enough signals in the retail prices. So this is just a comment for I mean, we have, I think, all the ingredients of a nice recipe, but we just need to implement them, and it's a huge work for the regulator. And for example, at Europe, the clean energy package is good, but it could be even better. So I have hope with the new Green Deal that we could improve that from a regulatory standpoint. Yeah, I'd like to have your comments on that if possible.
Thank you. Longer comment, short answer? There's a panel later with Jan as well, so you can add further.
I fully agree with what you said. I think it's now up to member states to really make the most of what's in the package. And I could also play the pessimist here and review how in the past that has played out, and often member states have not always implemented what was in there. And that really had consequences for the pace that we see in decarbonisation. I think the pricing aspect you referred to is important. We can actually see that in Norway, for example, with flat tariffs, people charge their cars when they come back from work. If you have a variable tariff, just a simple time of use tariff, you shift the peaks, and there's good evidence now that that actually works. So I think we have to do more of that in a way that actually benefits end users as well as the energy system, and I think it's possible.
Thank you very much. Jan, we are going to see you again later. And we are now moving to our second speaker. Give him a Danielle Turkov Wilson, please join us here. She's a filmmaker and a producer, and she uses films for advocacy campaigns to create social and political awareness. So I guess what you are going to share with us is rather different, probably complementary to what Jan just told us. I understand that we get a world-exclusive film screening, and the name of the film is The Future is Shit, the new black gold. Danielle, please introduce to us the film, and then we are going to look at it. It's some minutes, and we can discuss further.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and first of all, I'd like to thank Max and Brendan from the Ecologic Institute for inviting me to be here today. You're probably wondering what a filmmaker and producer is doing here in Brussels at such a conference full of incredible experts. Well, actually, first of all, I'd like to tell you that Think Film is quite a different company when it comes to the film world. We believe in bridging film human interest stories from high-level film world into the arena of high-level experts. Experts often do not get to see some of the human interest stories that are actually implementing some of the expertise that you're developing. And the expertise that you have is often not so easy to translate to a big audience globally. So you're probably thinking, the future is shit. Oh, right, yeah. Obvious, yeah? The whole climate situation. You're thinking, I'm now going to show you a film about the dystopian situation we're all faced with, and that it's all over. Well, actually, no, I'm about to show you a short sneak peek of a film production that we have in development about biogas, and how biogas could be a presentable, alternative, sustainable solution for energy sources. So we'll leave it at that for now, and then I'll give you some comments after we showcase the film.